Howdy folks, welcome back to Mingles with Jingles. Before we start this week's episode, I just need to talk a little bit about last week's episode. Last week's Mingles with Jingles was an emergency edition. My internet connection failed, I was offline, wasn't able to get online and check out all the questions that you'd asked in the previous week's Mingles. And so what I did last week was talk about a book that I'd read. It was by a fellow called Belton Cooper. It was called Death Traps, and I really enjoyed reading it, and his insight into working as a combat ordnance engineering officer in the 3rd Armoured Division in the Second World War. However, and this is quite embarrassing, it turns out that I've since been reliably informed by a lot of people who know a little bit more about history than I do, that while he wrote an entertaining book, Belton Cooper talked out of his arse. There's no real way of putting it other than that. His book wasn't complete rubbish, and it was an entertaining read. And the stuff that he was personally involved in, stuff that he actually did himself or witnessed himself, was all quite accurate for the most part. Things like mounting the additional armour onto the Super Pershing that they received in the 3rd Armoured Division. That was all great stuff. But he apparently has a very annoying habit of talking about stuff that he's heard. Rumours, presenting his opinions as fact, when in fact they're not. And we're primarily talking here, although there were other things, but mostly we're talking about the way he presented the reason for the lack of the introduction of the M26 Pershing into the US military inventory in the Second World War until much, much later on in the war. And he pretty much squarely put the blame on the shoulders of Lieutenant General George S. Patton. And several notable historians, and it's worth pointing out, Belton Cooper was not a historian. Right? He just wrote a book that happened to have historical context. He's not actually, and never was, and never claimed to be a historian. But lots of people who are historians have categorically turned around and said this is complete rubbish. Patton had nothing to do with it. So that's left me sitting here with egg on my face. Oops. And I was contacted personally by TheChieftain, who is Wargaming USA's technical advisor, and has a fantastic and criminally undersubscribed YouTube channel. And he actually made a very, very good point. And it's quite ironic, because I've ended up putting myself into the same position that Belton Cooper himself put himself in when he published his book, Death Traps. Here's me sitting in front of an audience of 100,000 people subscribed to me on YouTube, talking about things that are just blatantly untrue and presenting them as if they are fact. And I kind of have a responsibility to actually check my sources. And it never really occurred to me in this light until the Chieftain, pointed it out to me. There's 100,000 of you sitting out there listening to what I have to say. And what I have to say might not be true unless I take the responsibility to check my sources, the way Belton Cooper should have taken the responsibility of checking his sources when he wrote his book, Death Traps, instead of just repeating what he'd heard as if it was true. And so, there's a bit of a lesson there for me to learn. And I'm very, very grateful to the Chieftain for taking the time, not only to point this out, but also he pointed me in the direction of several very knowledgeable and highly respected military historians who quite firmly, when when asked exactly the same questions about Belton Cooper, categorically said, no, the man's talking out of his arse, and here's the proof. So a couple of things have arisen from this whole issue. First, there's an awful lot of you out there listening to everything that I have to say. And whether I like it or not, I do definitely have a responsibility to make sure that what I say is accurate. So that's one thing. Secondly, the other thing that became apparent from last week's Mingles with Jingles is just how much you guys love all of this historical stuff. And that's great, because I love it too. And so what I want to do is I want to kill a whole bunch of birds with the same stone here. And in order to apologise to you guys for getting my facts wrong in last week's Mingles with Jingles, as well as thank the Chieftain, amongst others, for putting me in the right direction, as well as pointing you guys who clearly love all of this history of mechanical warfare stuff. I'm going to highly recommend the Chieftain's own YouTube channel. And I'm going to recommend it for a number of reasons. One, the guy clearly knows what he's talking about, you know, unlike me. And he's gathered a whole bunch of very entertaining military historians around him who also know what they're talking about. And thirdly, he's got less than 4,000 subscribers. I couldn't believe it. His videos are amazingly good. Any of you with even the slightest interest in the history of mechanized and mechanical warfare need to be subscribed to his channel. I have spent hours browsing his videos. I was initially pointed there to look at the video where Belton Cooper's claims were specifically addressed. It was one of his Operation Think Tank videos. The whole Think Tank series is fantastic, but that's not the only things that he does. And I watched the one video and I had to watch more. It's amazingly good stuff, and I couldn't believe he had less than 4,000 subscribers. Seriously, folks, if you have the slightest interest in the history of armoured warfare, get yourself subscribed to the Chieftain Watt. Link in the video below, and I can't thank him enough for putting me in the right direction and setting my facts straight about the things that I was talking about Belton Cooper's book, which I would still recommend the book, but you need to take it with a pinch of salt. Anytime he's talking about stuff that he personally witnessed and worked on, it's all good stuff, but just be a little sceptical when he starts talking about things that he heard, because as I found out the hard way, it's not always true. Anyway, on with the questions. Normal service has now been resumed. First question this week comes from... Nope, I can't pronounce that. First question comes from Bob. Sorry, but you're Bob now. Bob wants to know, Jingles, what was the worst fight you ever got into? I would probably have to say the first Gulf War. It was the most boring 6 months of my life. Just on watch for 8 hours... off watch for 8 hours, on watch for 8 hours, off watch for 8 hours. Did that for 6 months. Yeah, it was just awful. It was horrible. Absolutely, there was just so little happening. Normally when you're deployed on a warship, you know, you're at sea for 2 weeks and then you spend a weekend somewhere nice and go out and get drunk and see the sights and what have you. The US Navy have it hard. I mean, they think nothing of doing a month and a half at sea before they, you know, stop anywhere. Royal Navy's got it quite easy in comparison. And even if you are at sea for large periods of time, you can, you know, do some exercises or, you know, whatever. But not when there's an actual war on. You know, you're cruising in defence watches with half the ship on watch and the other half asleep at any given time. And, you know, you need to be ready to go at the drop of a hat. So it's, you know, you're like a tightly coiled spring waiting for something to happen for 6 months and nothing happens. So yeah, first Gulf War was horrible. The next question comes from Bob again, and he wants to know, Jingles, what was the best fight you ever got into? First Gulf War, because nothing happened. Yeah, I like my wars boring. I have to admit, I shouldn't really be complaining about it because I don't know anybody who got killed, so that's a good fight as far as I'm concerned. I'm not particularly gung-ho. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, we're trained to do what needs doing. We just hope that we never have to do it. But if we do have to do it, then, you know, all hands to the pumps, crack on, get on with it. You know, the more professionally you do your job, the less chance that anybody you care about is going to die. But given the choice, I would rather nobody had to die. And the first Gulf War, certainly, didn't see any combat. Not personally. I mean, our ship's helicopter fired a few shots, but personally, the ship, nah. There was one moment in the first Gulf War, and I might have spoken about this in previous Mingles with Jingles videos. One moment, in fact I'm pretty sure I did. Quick recap: 6 months of absolute nothing with 10 minutes of stark terror. On the one day that the Iraqi Air Force came out to play and basically got shot down. But before they all got shot down, one of them got to within 30 seconds of Exocet launch range. before he got splashed and his wingman thought, screw that, dumped his weapons and ran for home. Other than that, the quietest war I have ever known. And long may that continue. Next question comes from the Joe Dude, the Fire Joe. Interesting name. He wants to know, Jingles, if you could choose any one place to live in the world, where would you go and why? That one's really, really easy. New York City. Oh yeah, you want to know why? Right, okay. Well, why New York City? Okay, first of all, I'm a city boy. I need broadband internet. I need the amenities that you can only get in a city. I'm definitely not a country boy, right? And nothing against people who are, but it's just not for me. I need to be in a big city. That's my natural environment. Why New York City? Well, I've never been to America with the Navy. Well, I've never been to North America with the Navy. I've been all over Central America, South America. Never been to Canada, never been to the USA. I have been to the USA, but I had to pay to get there myself. I've been there twice. Many, many years ago, I went to Louisiana, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans, which was great. And then when I was just about due to retire from the Navy, I had quite a bit of money saved up. This is before I got all my terminal grants and my gratuity and what have you when I actually left the Navy. When I was on my 3 months terminal leave, prior to actually leaving, I decided, you know what, I've never been to New York. I kept getting ships that were about to go to New York, or Norfolk in Virginia, or Miami, or whatever. And then I get drafted off them, or I would join a ship just after it got back from visiting Hawaii and San Diego. It's like I always just kept missing my window of opportunity. So I thought, I've got to see the place, and screw it, I'm going to do it. So I made plans to take a week in New York City, and I thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly. So I went and booked myself into the Peninsula Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Peninsula is a 5-star hotel. If you look at their website today, the room that I had costs $850 a night. And that's not their most expensive room. I mean, that was just a room, there are suites that will cost double that at the Peninsula. This room was 440 square feet. It had a marble bathroom. The bathroom had a hands-free TV, radio, and phone. While you're lying in the bath, you can, absolutely incredible hotel. It's the kind of hotel that when you walk into the lobby and the concierge salutes you and the bellboy comes over to take your bags, you fully expect to see James Bond leaning against the counter with a vodka martini in his hand, chatting up the, what's the word? Receptionist. There you go. Lost for words there for a moment. Yeah, it was that kind of hotel. 5 stars. Just amazing. The hotel was a 5-minute walk away from the Rockefeller Plaza in one direction. And the Radio City Music Hall. It was a 5-minute walk away from Central Park in the other direction. It was a 10-minute walk away from Times Square. Hotel was amazing. But I didn't go to New York for a week just to sit in a hotel all the time, although you could quite easily have spent the entire week just in the hotel. It was that good. The restaurants were fantastic, all in the hotel. The bars in the hotel were just... they had a rooftop bar as well. Oh, man, just, Stop talking about the hotel, Jingles. Tell them about New York. Okay, right. Sorry, Jingles. Right, here we go. The thing that I loved about New York City... I only really saw Manhattan. I didn't get to go to Brooklyn, Queens. I didn't go upstate to New Jersey. I didn't even go to Coney Island. None of that stuff. It was literally just. I mean, I was there for a week, and I only really had time to see some of Manhattan. So I'm sitting here talking about New York City. Really, I'm just talking about Manhattan. But the thing about Manhattan is that because the world has been exposed to American culture so much, American TV shows, movies, the whole thing, and you might not realize how much of New York you have actually seen. until you get there, and you're just constantly being exposed to so many things that you recognise that you may not have actually realised were New York. I mean, everybody's seen the Statue of Liberty. Everybody, well, if you haven't seen it, you know what it looks like. The Empire State Building. Maybe some of you even know what the Chrysler Building looks like. If you ever watch the TV show 30 Rock, you know what Rockefeller Plaza looks like and the Rockefeller Center. If you've watched Friends, you know what the Flatiron looks like. Even if you don't know that that's what it's called, it's a very recognisable building. And if you were to see it in New York, the first thing that would pop in your head would be, oh, it's that building from Friends, I don't know what it's called, that sort of thing. If you watched Night at the Museum, you know what the American Museum of Natural History looks like, and so on and so on and so on and so on. But there's so many other different times and places when I was wandering around Manhattan and I would just bump into something and think, oh my God, that was in this movie. And it's not a massive tourist attraction. Just a little diner on the corner of West 53rd Street. And you think, oh, I remember seeing Al Pacino having a cheeseburger in there in this movie, and so on and so on. And it's all just, you're constantly running into stuff like that when you walk around Manhattan. It's absolutely fantastic if you have the slightest interest in movies. Another example, when I was getting the taxi, when I literally stepped off the plane at JFK Airport, climbed into the taxi, and it took me straight down into Manhattan. It's quite a long drive. And I think it was on the way over the Brooklyn Bridge. I'm not entirely sure which bridge it was. But on the way there from JFK, do you remember the movie Men in Black? Right at the end, there was this weird sculpture, I suppose you'd call it, where the alien had hidden his spaceship. That's right there by the side of the road when you're driving from JFK into Manhattan. It's an actual landmark, if you like. I'd never seen it before. I assumed they just made it for the movie. They wanted something that, could be thought of as a disguised flying saucer. No, it actually exists. It's actually right there, sitting by the side of the road as you drive from JFK into Manhattan. And Manhattan is full of stuff just like that. I could spend the rest of my life wandering around Manhattan, just never getting bored of all the different stuff that there is to see there. I mean, you can spend a week just wandering around looking at the stuff in Central Park. I mean, it takes you 20 minutes just to walk from one end of the park to the other, and inside the park you've got any number of different museums. I mean, the American Museum of Natural History is in Central Park. You could spend 2 or 3 days wandering around that alone and not see everything in there. Manhattan is fantastic, and if I was to live in Manhattan, there's more than just Manhattan. There's Brooklyn, there's Queens, there's Yonkers. Yeah, definitely, no question about it. If I had to live anywhere, give me the choice, stick me in Manhattan. I probably couldn't afford it, but if you're going to give me the choice, yeah, definitely. Love to go back. Probably will go back. Yeah, I'm going to go back to New York. I probably won't be staying in a room that costs $850 a night next time, though. Next question comes from Ian Terry. He's got a good one. He wants to know, Jingles, if the Type 59G was available on the European server, would you buy it? For those of you who don't know what the Type 59G is, it's a Chinese Tier 8 premium medium tank. It's like the Type 59, but with a couple of differences. It's not available to players anywhere other than on the Chinese server. It's basically a standard Type 59 with a golden recolor, and it's got special decals on it. Yeah, that's right, it's a solid gold tank. That's why it's called the Type 59G. But it has one other difference. It earns double experience and double credits. Unfortunately, it comes at a price, a substantial price. The actual cost of one of these tanks varies depending on how the dollar's doing, but they've been selling for anything between the equivalent of $600 to $700 US. So no, I don't think I would ever. Well, I'm not going to say never. You never know. I might win the lottery, Of course, I'd have to actually take part in the lottery, so it's unlikely that I'm ever going to win it. But in the normal course of events, there is absolutely no way I would spend that amount of money on a virtual tank. Nah, it's just no way. And apart from anything else, they keep getting team killed. People on the Chinese servers hate Type 59G drivers, and they just keep team killing them. Whether that's through greed or disgust, whether that's through envy or disgust, I don't know. There's probably a mixture of both. And I'll bet the Type 59G drivers don't care, because if you're earning double XP and credits, and if you've spent that much money on a tank, you're going to have a premium account as well. So there's an extra 50% on top of that as well. You'll still make a credit, even if you don't fire a single shot and just get obliterated by your own team the second the game starts. You're still going to make money. But no, I would never buy one. If somebody feels like giving me one, I wouldn't say no, but no, it's not coming out of my pocket. Well, we're coming to the end of the video, and I wanted to round this one off, going back to a subject that I know is dear to all of your hearts, more funny stories from the Navy. And emphasis on the word funny this time around, because a lot of you have asked about the kind of practical jokes that we all play in each other in the armed forces. And if there's one thing that British servicemen love, it's playing practical jokes on each other. I know the Army are notorious for it. The Navy's no different. And there's a whole different categories of jokes that we all play on each other, ranging from the kind of jokes that you pull on the noobs, you know, the guys who are fresh out of training, the sort of thing that nobody had been in the Navy for longer than half an hour would ever fall for. Things like, for example, I don't know, you're working on the upper deck. One of the new guys comes over and says, I've been told to come over and give you a hand, mate. All right. Tell you what, do me a favour. Pop down to the buffer's store and see if you can get me a long stand. He goes, oh, okay. He runs down to the buffer's shop and he sees the leading seaman down there. He says, yeah, my part ship has sent me down to get a long stand. He says, oh, okay, mate. Yep, just go and stand over there in the corner, mate, and I'll be with you in a minute. And then the leading seaman will put his tools down and he'll go away for a cup of tea. And he'll leave you standing there. You asked for a long stand. And depending on how smart you are, depends how long you stand in the corner before you figure out that you've been had. You know, stuff like that. Or what's another example? Oh, yeah, sending somebody down to the paint shop to get some tartan paint is always a favourite. And sending somebody up to the engineer's workshop to get a left-handed screwdriver, that's always a good one. You're probably sitting there thinking, nobody's stupid enough to fall for this. Oh, yes, they are. And that's why it's funny. There's another whole category of jokes related to the bosun's mate and the quartermaster. When the ship is alongside, the bosun's mate and the quartermaster are the guys who control access to and from the ship. They're the security on the gangway. And they're also responsible for making any main broadcast announcements over the ship's internal communication system. We call them pipes. It's an old word, goes back to when announcements were actually made by blowing signals on a pipe. So if you want a main broadcast pipe made, you phone up the QM on the gangway and you ask him to do it for you. And so what we love doing is phoning up the quartermaster and asking him to basically announce something really stupid. See if he's not thinking and just goes ahead and does it. And the holy grail of gash pipes. I mean, there's all sorts of them. There's dozens of different ones that everybody's always trying to get the QM and the bosun's mate to do. But the holy grail is, this one's been around forever, is you phone up pretending to be the ship's PTI. And you'll phone up and you'll say, hello, mate. Yeah, it's the PTI here. Can you do me a favour and make a pipe? Yeah, well, what can I do for you? Can you just make the pipe, all members of the ship's rugby team, please return your strips to the PTI and balls to the master-at-arms. And then he makes the pipe. And the entire ship's company bursts out laughing at the same time. And the master-at-arms comes charging out the regulating office. Who the fuck made that pipe? Are you some kind of moron? It almost never works. Usually because the QM is a leading seaman and he's been around a while and he's heard them all before. But if you're lucky and the bosun's mate picks the phone up, and he's usually a bit wet behind the ears, he's usually a junior seaman, hasn't been around, tends to fall for this sort of thing, and you get him to make the pipe, and it's like, yes! And then finally, you've got the slightly more elaborate kind of practical joke, the kind of thing that takes a bit more planning and preparation than just picking a phone up and trying to get somebody to say something stupid. For example, the ship's office, what we used to do whenever the ship was away was we would run a money changing service. I mean, you can't walk around the streets of Turkey spending British money. You have to get it changed into whatever the Turkish currency is. So anytime we're about to go somewhere, the ship's office would publish money changing lists. And what that was every mess deck would get a money changing list, and the leader of the mess deck would ask everybody in the mess how much of the foreign currency they wanted according to the money changing list. Say if you want 80 dib-dobs, that's going to be £37. You go, right, okay, write a cheque for £37, stick it in, little paper clip attached to the back of the list, and then all the mess deck leaders would take the lists with the cheques up to the ship's office. Ship's office would sort out the money for each mess deck. Then they would announce money changing, and everybody would queue up outside the ship's office. We already had their cheque. We'd give them the money. Simple as that. So, how's that funny? Well, it isn't. But when you're going somewhere where British money is the currency, like Gibraltar or the Falkland Islands, you do a money changing list anyway and see how many people are so incredibly fucking stupid to actually turn up and have their British money changed into British money at an exchange rate of 1-to-1. You would be amazed how many people fall for it. Another classic is splash target coxswains. I'll have to explain this one a little, and you'll be shaking your head in amazement at the end of it that anybody is dumb enough to fall for this. A splash target it's quite literally, it's a gunnery target that is towed behind the ship. Right? Simple as that. It's a big orange float thing, and you tow it behind the ship, and the gunners shoot at it. A coxswain is somebody responsible for being in charge of and driving a boat. So a splash target coxswain, logically, is somebody responsible for sitting in and taking charge of a splash target that the gunnery crews are going to shoot at. And if at this point you're sitting there thinking to yourself, whoa, wait a minute, people actually volunteer to sit in gunnery targets? Yes, they do. People really are that stupid. The Warfare Department will push out an XTM, an Executive Officer's Temporary Memorandum, asking for volunteers for splash target coxswains. The XTM will explain how it works and offer them some financial inducement to volunteer. £20 per session, for example. And there's never a shortage of volunteers, of morons. And yeah, sleep soundly, Britain. These are the kind of idiots who protect your shores. So, having just completely undermined your faith in the intelligence of the people who protect Britain while she sleeps at night, I'm going to have to bring this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles to a close. But before I finish, I just want to remind you guys, because I mentioned it right at the beginning of the video, and you've probably forgotten by now, because I know what you like. TheChieftain World of Tanks. Check out his YouTube channel, seriously. Less than 4,000 subscribers is just a crime. If you have even the slightest interest in military history, particularly the history of armoured warfare, and I know you do, judging by the response to the last Mingles with Jingles video, where I talked at great length and some considerable inaccuracy about the M26 Pershing and the M4 Sherman during Second World War II, then you'll find hours worth of entertainment on his channel. His channel is linked in the video description. The name of it is appearing up on screen right now. Do yourselves a favour, get over there and have yourself a great time learning all sorts of stuff about tanks. As always, folks, take care on that battlefield, watch your six, and I'll catch you next time.
Goodbye.